Buoy battle. The Biden administration takes Texas to court, saying the state's buoy barrier placed in the Rio Grande along the southern border violates federal law. Governor Greg Abbott is pushing back. Impeachment fight. Suspended Attorney General Ken Paxton and one of his key supporters are challenging the upcoming impeachment trial in the Texas Senate. And teachers talking. We hear from North Texas educators who say they're disappointed the state legislature didn't approve pay raises for teachers before the new school year begins. I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas starts right now. For the second week in a row, the state's border policies are making national headlines. And this week, the Biden administration followed through on its promise to file a lawsuit against the state of Texas, claiming a floating buoy barrier in the Rio Grande violates federal law. Ken Molestina takes a look at the controversy.
Crossing the border illegally while trying to evade detection can be incredibly perilous for migrants, and drowning is just one of the major risks. Just this month, 4 people, including a baby girl, drowned in the Rio Grande in Eagle Pass while trying to cross the border. Days later, a 1,000-foot-long floating barrier was placed into the river. Some worry that that will create an even more dangerous situation. It's why the U.S. Department of Justice sent a letter to the governor announcing plans to sue unless he committed to removing the barrier. Well, today was a deadline for him to do that, and he posted on social media saying in part, "Mr. President, Texas will see you in court." The DOJ has now officially filed a lawsuit. The department and other critics say the buoys raise humanitarian concerns and present serious safety risks. I spoke with Texas DPS Lieutenant Christopher Olivares today, who told me that DPS understands the river is dangerous, but the goal is for the floating barrier to deter migrants from even entering the Rio Grande in the first place.
So anytime you have a barrier such as the marine barrier or infrastructure, concertina wire, we have that in place to act as a deterrent, to discourage anyone from even stepping foot in the river. So we don't want anyone to cross the river because it's very dangerous.
Olivares said the buoys will remain in place for now, and there is even a possibility that more will be added if they prove to be an effective deterrent. There have been reports of a net attached to the buoys, which has raised even more safety concerns. Olivares said that those reports are not accurate.
So there's no netting, there's no secret traps, around this barrier. All we have right now in place is those 4-foot diameter buoys that are clearly visible from Mexico on both sides.
The marine barrier is just one tool being used to deter migration at the southern border. There's also chain link fencing, there's concertina or razor wire, and even storage containers.
A constitutional law professor predicts the Biden administration will win its case against the state in court. Texas built its barrier of buoys in the Rio Grande near Eagle Pass as part of Operation Lone Star, a multi-billion-dollar program state leaders say is designed to boost border security. But the Biden administration says the buoys go against federal law.
It is the federal government.
And SMU constitutional law professor Jeffrey Kahn says the law is clear.
What's more, the lawsuit is on very, very firm legal ground.
In its lawsuit, the Biden administration said the buoys violate the Rivers and Harbors Act, which it says prohibits the creation of any obstruction not affirmatively authorized by Congress to the navigable capacity of any of the waters of the United States. The law cites 19 specific examples or any other obstacle or obstruction.
Heavy construction equipment was necessary to put these things into the river. If that's not an obstruction, I don't know what is.
Governor Abbott rejected the lawsuit on Fox News last night.
They're using some obscure statute to try to stop us from continuing to deploy those buoys. It's not grounded in law whatsoever. We believe we have the right to do so.
The White House press secretary blasted the governor's policy.
Instead of coming to the table and trying to figure out a way to work together, he continues to do this really cruel, unjust, inhumane ways of moving forward.
Governor Abbott has already vowed to take this case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, but Professor Kahn says the state recently lost a case to the federal government on immigration.
Just a month ago, Texas was told in pretty convincing terms by the United States Supreme Court that it didn't have standing to tell the federal government how to prioritize its immigration arrests and deportation proceedings. I think we're going to get the same result.
The state hasn't responded to the lawsuit in court just yet. Now to the latest on the upcoming impeachment trial of suspended Attorney General Ken Paxton. His legal team filed a motion saying that Democratic state senators Nathan Johnson of Dallas, Jose Menendez of San Antonio, and Roland Gutierrez of San Antonio should be disqualified from taking an active role in the trial because of public statements they made against Paxton before and after he was impeached. The Attorney General's lawyers say the 3 Democratic senators won't be impartial, as the Texas Constitution requires. But attorneys for the House impeachment managers disagree and filed a motion opposing this. One of Paxton's supporters, Dr. Stephen Hotze of Houston, filed a lawsuit saying the Senate's rules violate the Texas Constitution, specifically that the lieutenant governor's gag order in the case violates free speech. The lawsuit also says the Senate's rule disqualifying Paxton's wife, Senator Angela Paxton, from taking an active role on the jury is unconstitutional. We spoke with an attorney not involved in this case, and he says the lawsuit won't likely go anywhere.
I think there's a serious argument that says that this is not a justiciable matter. It's not something the courts have jurisdiction over. The Constitution puts the responsibility to conduct an impeachment squarely on the House and the Senate, doing exactly what they've been doing.
Paxton is also demanding that the House impeachment managers provide more specifics about the accusations against him. Now we're going to devote the rest of this show to education. As the new school year is set to begin, we are hearing from some North Texas teachers about the challenges they face in the classroom. And one major concern, the fact that state lawmakers haven't yet approved pay raises for teachers.
My name is Yulena Trice. I work for Duncanville Independent School District, and I've been teaching for 25 years now.
My name is George Cuba. I work in Irving ISD. 1 year as substitute teacher and the last 2 years as a math teaching assistant.
George Cuba, who works at Singley Academy, and Yulena Trice, who works at Brandenburg Intermediate School, represent the different levels of teaching experience in North Texas classrooms, but they share the same passion.
I'm always looking forward to meeting new students, working with staff.
It's always nice kind of coming back to seeing them a year older and getting closer to graduation.
They're concerned about what lies ahead. The new school year is set to begin as Cuba and Trice, along with thousands of other Texas teachers, counted on receiving a raise. State lawmakers, though, didn't approve a pay increase for teachers during their regular legislative session. They'll consider doing so during a third special session this fall as part of a $5 billion boost in school funding. So what's your message?
I was very disappointed when it came down that we would not be receiving raises. So I was thrown off by it, and it kind of hurt because they always say we're important, we're needed, and we are. But when this happened, it showed me that, well, are we really that important?
I always said teachers are important, they're heroes, and when it comes to put the money where the mouth is, there's nothing.
To help recruit new teachers and keep those in the profession from leaving, Governor Greg Abbott's Teacher Vacancy Task Force made a number of recommendations, including funding a significant increase in overall teacher salaries. The report, released earlier this year, shows newer teachers quitting in higher numbers than those with a lot more experience. Both Cuba and Trice told me the COVID-19 pandemic brought them to a point where they nearly walked away from teaching.
But I was thinking about my family, I was thinking about my own health. That was a point in my career where I was just like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. And I had to calm down and just think about, okay, we need to be here for these kids.
You have students who are a bit more, unruly, and some of them really push the boundaries extremely far. And so because of that, some teachers have resigned. So I've thought, twice about it.
But at the end, you decided to stay with it.
Yes. For the past 3 years, I built a relationship with my coworkers, my school, and my students, especially my students, and I care about their growth and development.
The Teacher Vacancy Task Force found nearly half of the state's teachers said student discipline problems are a top concern. Cuba, who is hoping to become a full-time high school math teacher this year, says he's experienced it too.
Just disregarding teachers' directions, talking back to teachers, just small issues like that. And those kinds of issues, like talking back to teachers, that led one of my coworkers to quit. because it just became too much.
Trice, who taught in Georgia and Illinois before coming to Texas, says virtual learning during the pandemic hurt student achievement and socialization skills.
And then once they came back into school, it's like starting all over. It was more than day one. It was like, how do you do school again? The consensus has been with most of the teachers that I've worked with through the teachers union, they felt as though they weren't really being supported when it came to discipline.
Despite the challenges, Trice and Kuba say they are not giving up on teaching. Are you hopeful for that things are going to get better?
But we're going to still keep fighting. I'm still very hopeful for that. I still get excited when it's time for school. I'm excited about, what I'm going to do. What I love about teaching is the opportunity to see a person grow. And I also have the opportunity to be really creative and helping them, get to the next level.
I am hopeful that things will get better. I mean, it's only, things only get better when we do our best to try to make them better. I mean, personally, I don't want to leave, but if I'm made to leave, then that's a sad thing. We don't want to push away people from not being teachers. We want people to see that teaching is a viable, not just a dignified profession, but a viable profession.
A recent report by the George W. Bush Institute and the organization Texas 2036 found too many Texas students don't have the knowledge and skills to succeed in their next grade and later on in the workforce.
Enough young Texans are really prepared for life after high school, a life with real opportunity.
Ann Wicks of the George W. Bush Institute is one of the authors of The State of Readiness. Are Texas students prepared for life after high school? The Institute and the group Texas 2036 published the report and found just 22% of Texas 8th graders earn a degree or credential within 6 years of their high school graduation.
It shocked me, honestly. I mean, I do this work and it shocked me.
So the big question is, why is this happening?
Well, we think it's because kids just are getting off track. So if you look right now, about 60% of all Texas students, only about 60% are on grade level in math. And only about 48% are on grade level in reading.
The report says by 2036, when Texas turns 200 years old, 70% of jobs in the state will require a post-secondary credential, such as a college degree or a trade certification. And people moving to Texas hold nearly 2 times as many bachelor's degrees as native Texans in the workforce.
That means the people who move here are highly educated, ready to work. They might be coming here for jobs. And we have to make sure that we're not leaving behind young Texans.
The report by the Institute not only lays out the problems that Texas faces, but also offers solutions, some that the state is already working on. Among them, recommit to measuring student readiness at every stage. The report praises the legislature's efforts to improve the STAR exam. Another recommendation, establish a more rigorous approach to college and career readiness. The report cites certification programs similar to this one at Dallas College for a variety of in-demand trades.
Right, to help people access targeted education they need that gets them into a high-demand job. That's really critical.
Your student's future could depend on it. And coming up a little later, more of our interview with the author of that report, Ann Wicks of the George W. Bush Institute. But next, we'll show more of our conversation with some North Texas educators who discussed openly their concerns. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. We'll be right back. Within just a few weeks, most North Texas teachers and students will be back in the classroom for the start of a new school year. Here's more of our interview with 2 educators who discussed their concerns. Well, thank you both very much. We really do appreciate it. And Yelena, why don't you start us off? Introduce yourself. Tell us how long you have been teaching and what you teach.
Of course. Good morning. My name is Yelena Trice. I work for Duncanville Independent School District, and I've been teaching for 25 years now.
And George.
So my name is George Cuba. I work in Irving ISD. I've been working as a paraprofessional for 3 years. 1 year as substitute teacher, and the last 2 years as a math teaching assistant.
And so here we are, we're getting ready for a new school year. How excited are you? Well, Yelena, we'll start with you. How excited are you about the new school year?
I'm very excited about the new school year. I'm always looking forward to meeting new students, working with staff. Also, given the changes, I am anticipating some challenges. due to the teacher shortage. So I'm really anxious to start off the new year and get things going so I can go ahead and do what I need to do, what's best for students as we start off a new year.
And George?
Well, I'm excited. I want to see my students again. It's always nice kind of coming back to seeing them a year older and getting closer to graduation. Trying to be a teacher, so I'm not sure who's going to take my spot, because I know that to the teachers I was helping, it was a good help, even just having a second body in the classroom to at least have some reassurance. I'm not sure. I would say I'm very excited. I think some coworkers that I knew for the past year or two have left, and some of them left the profession. So it's kind of uncertain. I'm like, will I be next? Will I have less support this year? So there's some uncertainty to the future, even though I'm excited to teach again and to finally teach in a full capacity and see my students again.
And you want to be a teacher full-time.
Yes.
And so you've been a teaching assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And so tell me what your job entails.
So teaching assistant, basically, at a minimum, I tutor students. So students who are falling behind in class, or students who, in my case, it was designed specifically, my position is designed because of House Bill 4545, which that any student who failed a required STAR test, in this case Algebra 1 or the 8th grade math, they needed to get 30 hours of instruction outside of the core classes. So for example, you couldn't offer 30 minutes of tutoring during their math class because that's during the instruction time, it wouldn't count. So for those students, we call them retesters. I would tutor them in batches and groups with other teachers as help. Also during classes, I could enter the class, and while a math teacher gave their direct lesson, I could help them in class, kind of do like a mini lesson and go over materials. And then in some cases, I would even help co-teach lessons with the teacher because they knew I wanted to be a teacher, so they'd give me opportunities to teach in a greater capacity. So I would do pretty much all the way from tutor all the way to even a co-teacher in the classroom.
You both spoke about the challenges that you face. Yelena, tell me about the challenges that you're expecting this year to face, and what are your biggest concerns?
One of the challenges I'm definitely concerned about is, given that we have the teacher shortage, covering classes, making sure those students have someone in the classroom. There have been times I have been pulled to cover. Just because a teacher is out, we may not always get a substitute, so therefore it falls on the staff that's currently in the building to cover those classes. And with that, also being able to just service my students that I do work with, because if I'm pulled to cover a class, I can't always get to the students that need the help, because since I am a special education teacher and there's service time when it comes to working with these kids, just to make sure they have the skills that they need. That is definitely a challenge, and it's a concern that I really have this year. Also in working with, given that we have a shortage, we will have new staff, and that new staff also will have to get acclimated with working with the kids. And I enjoy working with new people because they're open to what given that I am a veteran teacher, the pitfalls, the concerns, what to expect when it comes to working with kids. So it's a twofold situation as far as just meeting the needs of the kids, and also I'm really looking forward to just working with the new staff.
And George, what are the challenges that you are concerned about going into this new year?
Well, Yelena there were 2 points she went over that was on in my head too, because I felt that. One of them is in terms of coverage. I know that whenever, not just this past school year, but the year before, so my first year as substitute teacher, of course, within my job title and job description to cover the classes to substitute. But these 2 years after that, or the past 2 years, as a teaching assistant, well, that's not my official job cast anymore. But with all the teacher, not just absences, but also resignations as well, and especially in January of 2021, there 2021, 2021, 22, I think it might have been, no, 22, yeah, last year. There was so many absences because of the new surge of COVID. I had to substitute every day, and when I substitute every day, that means that I don't get to TA, I don't get to tutor minimum, I get to tutor. It's the students that I needed to have tutored for their algebra retest in that spring, they didn't get a chance all of January because I was substituting all the time. So that's a big concern as a paraprofessional, as a TA, that I'm just another sub on the roster, and that my formal job gets kind of secondary placement because, well, they do need to cover all the students, but, well, if that cuts into my formal job, then we're at an impasse in a way. And of course, you know, I like my staff, I like my coworkers, I like my students, I like my school. So, you know, I do what's necessary, but also, like, if it's cutting into my normal job, then why did I sign up for my normal job in the first place?
Have you thought about leaving the profession?
Yes, that January of 2022, that was a very intense moment. There was so much substituting to do that entire month. I didn't get to TA at all. Not until February, I think start of February, I got to TA. And I know I told myself, like, if this keeps up, you know, it's gonna hurt because it's my alma mater. I went to that high school, but I'm gonna have to resign. And then also this summer as well. This summer, I think it's the second year after COVID, so we're dealing with still a lot of fallout, social emotional fallout from students and also staff due to just how online learning went. So not just shorter attention spans, but also just, how do I say this, more unconventional behavior, just because, well, they were out of school for a time and now coming back to like a routine of school has become behaviorally difficult for some students. And some teachers, well, that's not what they not only not prepared for, but sign up for. You have students who are a bit more, how do I say this, unruly, and some of them really push the boundaries like extremely far. And so because of that, some teachers have resigned, and so that's very, that for me, it's like with some of my coworkers I work with resigned because of that. You know, do I feel comfortable, you know, kind of going back to that and being the next resignation? So I've thought, you know, twice about it. I don't like thinking about it because I like working in my school. I like working with students. I like being a teacher in a teaching capacity, but it's definitely something that crossed my mind, yeah.
But at the end, you decided to stay with it.
Yes, for the past few years, I built a relationship with my coworkers, my school, and my students, especially my students. And I care about their growth and development. I care about them becoming good people, and me being a part of that, and just all the little victories that come with them growing up. I know a student of mine, probably one of the best ones I still remember, was I was substituting class, and so granted it was the last class of the day, so I did most of my job for most of the day. But he stopped by and said, "Hey, it's like, Mr. Kuba, it's like, you think I'm gonna pass the STAR?" And it was, I think, a week before the Algebra 1 STAR test. And I'm like, well, it's like, did you study? He's like, yeah. It's like, and so like, yeah, it'll be fine. It's like, you're only one question away last time, so you should more than enough get more than one question right this time. So I'm just, don't get cocky, because he definitely could get a little cocky at times. And I told him, it's like, yeah, you know, just try your best. You know, I taught you well, and you're really trying, so it'll be fine. He's like, are you sure about that? And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. And lo and behold, he passed this year. So that was very nice. And I keep thinking, I'm like, wow, it's like, you know, I was just wrapping up in the classroom, and I was covering in, and he decided to stop by after school. So that was very considerate of him. I think that, yeah, typically most students tend not to try to find their teaching assistant in the school, but you know, he found me and he tried to, you know, get some reassurance, and he got reassurance. So that's something that some of the memories like those kind of keep me, remind me that, like, okay, this is what I'm trying to do.
So that was the reward for you.
Yes, yeah. Not only hearing that, hey, it's like, you think I'm gonna pass, but also seeing that he passed. And I think this year, because I can't help all the teachers the same amount, but the teachers that I helped the most as a TA ended up getting some of the highest scores on campus on the math, on the Algebra STAR. So that was very neat. And of course, you know, we don't want to always tie test performance to ability and also, what's the other word? Not capacity, but capability. But it was very nice seeing, like, okay, you know, I am making a difference here. And that's, I think, probably the most, one of the most important words as a teacher, is that, you know, you're making a difference. And that's a very rewarding feeling.
And Yelena, you've been teaching for 25 years. And have you ever come to a point where you thought, you know what, I'm going to leave the profession?
Yes, especially when COVID happened. I was very nervous about going into the schools When COVID hit, we were virtual when it first happened, and then we switched to in-person for some students and then virtual. I was very, very close to resigning, and I had to calm down and just think about, okay, we need to be here for these kids. Let me think about everything that I've done up to this point. We are taking measures to be safe, but I was thinking about my family. I was thinking about my own health. That was a point in my career where I was just like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I didn't want to do the virtual teaching. Honestly, I didn't like it because you don't have the same interactions with your students. Kids need to be in person. Not to say that you can't do virtual, but we're not socialized that way, not to the point to where we had to just completely, do a lot of this online. There was a point to where we had to do virtual and in person because all the kids weren't back. And it's very challenging, it's very frustrating. When I started teaching, everything was in person. I'm pretty sure incoming teachers or pre-service teachers, that's going to be an option for them. They're socialized this way. The internet wasn't like it is now when it comes to education. So we've made great strides because I know there are classes where there isn't a teacher, and because of that, they're doing it remotely, so therefore those kids are getting it virtually. But when I saw that big shift, that really scared me because I was like, okay, we have COVID, so now what? Where does that put me? Because I co-teach, I pull kids into my own classroom, and I work in groups. A lot of my job is socialization. But when it comes to public education, we serve the masses in different, various types of settings and service models in order to help our kids. And I just thought I wasn't going to be effective with my job if I wasn't able to, fully do it in person.
And so what was the deciding factor that you would stay?
When they talked about vaccinations, the school district was taking steps to keep us safe with masks, the distancing. We had devices where we could sanitize and spray down, just getting the education, because I was learning as much as I could as far as how I could be safe for myself and my family, as well as also being safe for my students. Because at first it was like, we got to teach, but we have all these other things that could happen in the classroom. Somebody could get sick. So as time went on, and as, the more I was able to interact, and I'm glad we didn't, just go back in person fully. While we were online, there were things we were able to do. And as we became more knowledgeable just as a society, regarding what was going on with COVID, I felt a lot better.
And I wanted to ask you, because one of the unfinished pieces of business with the state legislature this year is school funding, but in large part teacher pay raises. When you listen to lawmakers, they all say they are committed to giving teachers a pay raise from the state, giving districts more money. And so I'm wondering, what is your message, and Yolanda, we'll start with you, what is your message to lawmakers who are going to be coming back in the fall to decide how much money should go? And there's $5 billion, I'm told, in the state budget set aside for funding for schools, in large part for teacher pay raises. So what's your message?
My message to lawmakers is that teachers work very, very hard. We deal with all the other things that come into the school. Whatever's going on in society actually filters into what we're doing. Besides teaching, we do the planning, we have the meetings, we keep track of data. We're there every day to make sure that these kids are doing what they need to do. Along with all of the other things that students are dealing with. We deal with students who are homeless, students who are hungry. As Mr. Kuba has alluded to, the social emotional piece, not only for the students, but also for the teachers. So first and foremost, we see it on the front lines. We see it, head on. And given that we went through all of the changes and sacrifices and the different learning styles with COVID, I was very disappointed when it came down that we would not be receiving raises. Even though even the task force that was put together stated that one of the things that needed to be done was that we need a raise. So I was thrown off by it, and it kind of hurt because they always say we're important, we're needed, and we are. But when this happened, it showed me that, well, are we really that important? Even though without it, without a teacher, we're the springboard for everything else. Someone had to teach someone something. They had to mentor someone. So this is like a core, this is the foundation of what we do.
George?
Yeah, so unsurprisingly, it's always had like teachers are important, they're heroes, especially with essential workers, right? With like nurses and doctors in the hospitals, like way back beginning of the pandemic, where they're heroes, they're essential, and then like when it comes to put the money where the mouth is, there's nothing. Teachers at least, I believe the last proposal was like 4,000 across the board, because the previous one was 6,000 for rural and 2,000 for urban. And of course, teachers need their raises. I mean, I believe AFT did their study that titled The Lost Decade, where the past decade, the overall teacher raise has been like negative, actually, like slightly negative. So there's actually been a decrease in net pay, just accounting for inflation. But for pairs, like there wasn't anything. I know that AFT pushed para pay. I believe that the increase would have been to $15 an hour for the Respect campaign, and then there was a resolution that passed in the recent Texas AFT convention that minimum pay for paraprofessionals and other classified staff will be $25 an hour, which is pretty good. And especially in my case, that would be $10 more than I get paid right now.
Our thanks to both of them, and you can watch all of our interview on our website, cbstexas.com. Coming up, we speak with the author of a study about the state of readiness of Texas students. Are they prepared for life after high school? Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas comes right back. A recent study by the George W. Bush Institute and the organization Texas 2036 is raising questions about whether Texas students are prepared for life after high school. We spoke with the author, Ann Wicks, about the findings, and she says they surprised her. Ann Wicks of the George W. Bush Institute, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. So you recently co-authored a study about whether schools in Texas are adequately preparing our students for the future. And in fact, it was titled "The State of Readiness: Are Texas Students Prepared for Life After High School?" The obvious question, are they?
Unfortunately, not enough. Not enough young Texans are really prepared for life after high school, a life with real opportunity. We were glad to take on this project with our partners at Texas 2036, but we looked at a range of outcome data, and here's some important things to know. Right now, if you look across the state of Texas, only about 22% of all eighth graders, like a class of eighth graders across the state, will eventually go on to get some sort of degree credential beyond high school, only 22% of them. So once they graduate, that they ever go on to something else. But we know by 2036, when Texas turns 200, about 70% of all jobs in our state will require something beyond high school, whether it's a 2 or 4 year degree or a certificate and some further training. So that leaves a big, big gap. And we estimate that that's going to be about $104 billion of lost earnings right now for those eighth graders when you think about it over their adult lives. And of course, that's disproportionately borne by our students in Texas who are living in poverty, our Black and Hispanic students. So it's something we really all need to pay attention to as we think about the importance, the health of Texas, our economic health, our community health, as we look forward into the future.
22%. That's shocking to hear.
It shocked me, honestly. I mean, I do this work, and it shocked me to kind of look at that and think about that gap to 70%, about what real, like someone being able to support themselves and their family, a job that would give them that kind of wage is going to require something more than a high school diploma. That's different in today's world.
So the big question is why? is this happening? Why are only 22% of students, and that's from the eighth graders, right?
Yeah, if you look at a
Moving on.
cohort of eighth graders. Yep.
Okay, so 22% of those cohort of eighth graders actually go on to achieve more than a high school diploma. That's what you're saying.
Yep.
And so why is that happening?
Well, we think it's because kids just are getting off track. So if you look right now, about 60% of all Texas students, only about 60% are on grade level in math. And only about 48% are on grade level in reading. So if kids start to get off track, if they're off track in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, they kind of become, school is not their thing. They think school is not their thing. And so we think it's really important for us to make sure that we're focused on strong instruction for schools, that kids are getting the right kind of instruction. They're being taught reading, for example, in the right way, a research-based way. That they're getting great instruction and they're getting real opportunity and options to access something beyond high school, that they understand what that looks like. That can show up in our state accountability system. There's something called our college, career, and military readiness. There's a bucket of that in our accountability system. And we want to make sure the things that qualify for that are actually meaningful and prepare someone for college, career, or military readiness. Sometimes we call it a little bit of slop in that bucket. And we want to make sure kids are getting really rigorous options so they're ready for what comes next.
And, when you look at the broader picture, everybody seems to be moving to Texas. We have massive job growth, massive population growth. But when I've talked to businesses and even relocation firms who are there to recruit businesses to come to Texas, I always ask, well, why are they coming here? And, besides the cost of doing business being very low, the one thing I always hear from them is that the workforce is here. They like the fact that, especially in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, they like the fact that there are workers here. And so I'm wondering, if that is the case, doesn't that show that Texas is producing people who are, graduate, eighth grade, they graduate high school, and they graduate colleges?
You'd think so, right? You'd think so. But here's what's important to note. Those companies are moving here, but a lot of people are moving here right now. So the folks who move into Texas from other states hold bachelor's degrees at 2 times the rate of native Texas. So when you think about that, that means the people who move here are highly educated, ready to work. They might be coming here for jobs. And we have to make sure that we're not leaving behind young Texans, our own native Texas workforce, that they're ready to access that same opportunity. We think about, you referenced, it's kind of the Texas miracle, right? This economic boom that we have. And that's about the conditions, as you indicated, the cost of doing business, but it's also about the human capacity we have here. And it's really important that we stay focused on things like our young Texans being prepared to access that same opportunity that some of the folks who are moving here are able to do.
So how does and how should Texas fix this issue?
Yeah, we recommend a few things in our report. Number one, we have to stay consistent with our assessment and our accountability system. People don't love talking about that, but we have to measure what matters. We have to know what's real for kids, who's learning, who's on track, and who's not, so that we can intervene with the right kind of policy and resources on our state legislature when they make decisions about what to do. We saw that, for example, in the last legislative session in 2021, we had assessment data that helped us understand which kids had really fallen the farthest behind in COVID. And they were able to pass a couple of bills that immediately directed some more resources for tutoring and access to other things for kids. That's great policymaking if you've got reliable data to show what's really happening for kids. We can't sort of make decisions, as I say, based on averages and anecdotes, because if you do that, it's really easy to sort of say, oh, those kids are just not going to really learn, or they don't need this, when in fact, of course, there's so many children across the state that do. We also think we need to increase the options available for kids to access something post high school, whether that's additional paths to 2 or 4 year degrees or other credential programs. I'm really excited, for example, that the legislature passed the community college finance reform. I think that's going to be really interesting and create lots of access to opportunity for Texans across our state. And the third thing is that we have to do what I'd mentioned before, make those college, career, and military readiness options real. Make sure that if a child qualifies for one of those, that they're actually, it's giving them agency, it's giving them some choices once they leave their high school campus.
You know, there's a lot to discuss on this, and I'm glad we're talking about this. I have to say, I've covered the campaign trail, I covered the governor's race, I've covered other races out there. And one thing that became clear to me is that when candidates would bring up the STAR test, people in the audience do not like the STAR test. They have bashed it for years. Candidates have bashed it and criticized it for years. And they say the problem is that teachers are teaching to the STAR test and there's no real learning going on. And so I hear, you know, I know that as my experience, and yet I wonder how do you take that and discuss what you're saying is real accountability measures. You're saying that the state needs some kind of test, STAR or whatever, to make sure we know how our students are doing.
Yes, I'm so glad you asked about this. So one, it's a federal law that we actually have a state summative assessment like this, thanks to President George W. Bush when he was in office. That's part of the work that he did. It's federal law. So I always kind of chuckle when I hear a candidate say they're going to get rid of it because they actually can't. But the second thing, when people say, oh, they're teaching to the test, I say great, because the test is based on the Texas standards, the TEKS. You might have heard people talk about the TEKS. Those are designed by Texas educators. What do we think kids should know in these subjects in every grade? So teachers design, say, we think it's important that kids know these things in math in 4th grade. And so the STAR test is then designed to see if those standards have been met. So when a teacher says, I don't want to teach to the test, I'm like, well, why not? It's reflecting the standards that we set, that teachers build across the state, that we think it's important for kids to learn in a grade to understand if we're on track or not. And I think just most people don't understand that. That's a little bit of inside baseball, kind of wonky ed policy, but that's how that's built. And that's why we think it's important. Otherwise, we're saying, well, okay, it doesn't really matter if you didn't get to this part of fractions or you didn't get this part of your grammar or this lesson in history, and it's okay, you can move on. When in fact, we know all that knowledge really builds upon each other as a student moves through the public school system, and it's really critical. It's really important.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned community colleges, and I've done a variety of stories at Dallas College and some of the programs that they have for very high need careers. You're talking about nursing, even in the restaurant field, and even in certifications as far as the trades are concerned. And so talk to me about how important those are. And do you think the workforce programs that the state is trying to cultivate are doing their job?
Yes, I think a great community college is one of the very best assets we have in this country and in Texas. They can do so many things, and they can do it fairly quickly, right? To help people access targeted education they need that gets them into a high demand job. That's really critical. Your example around nursing, for example, or in medical field, high need industries, it's really important for, and I think it's a lot of leverage if you are a corporate leader, if you are a city or a regional leader, to think about who are we trying to recruit and how do we get more of them? Community colleges are a great tool. One of the other things that we have in Texas that we're really lucky about is the Tri-Agency, the Texas Tri-Agency, which is another legislative policy effort that's come over the last several sessions that requires the Texas Education Agency, our K-12 agency, the Higher Ed Coordinating Board, and the Workforce Commission to all work together and share data and come up with some common goals about workforce development here in Texas. Not a lot of states have something like that, and it's allowing us to understand who's accessing what, where they're going, what does that wage data look like over time. They're on the front end of that work. That's really powerful stuff for us to make decisions about how do we sustain the Texas miracle? How do we make sure that all Texans are able to access opportunity? So that's again, it's kind of wonky, right? There's not a lot of headlines about the Texas Tri-Agency, but it's a really important policy tool that we have here in the state that I think will benefit more and more folks over time.
When Amazon was considering Dallas, it was a semifinalist, but when they were considering Dallas, the whole region, as a location for their second corporate headquarters, when they announced that they were not including Dallas, I remember the then mayor, Mike Rawlings, of the city, said that one of the things that they had gotten school districts and local universities to agree upon was operate these and formulate an Amazon Academy, where you are taking elementary school kids and working, and preparing them for the workforce after they graduate, starting at a very young age, and working with, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and colleges. And that didn't happen because Amazon didn't come here. But I asked then, well, why not still do it? And there wasn't really the impetus to do it.
Well, I think Amazon lost out by not coming here, because I do think that you see a lot of entrepreneurial spirit like that to create new pathways. Sometimes it takes a big hook like that, a big catalyst to coming to town, but I think it's a really interesting idea. And I know we've seen somewhere like in Midland, I know that they've been working on a program that helps them build. They need more early childhood teachers. They need some more preschool early childhood teachers, and they've built a really interesting pathway with their community college system. So you see examples like that all over our state. I think there's some interesting examples around that in the medical field in the Valley, in the Rio Grande Valley. So I think one of the best assets we have in Texas is kind of this entrepreneurial spirit and enough freedom in the policy world to maneuver where things like that could happen. It'd be great to see something like that happen in the Metroplex, that maybe it wouldn't be, specific around some high need fields, but it'd be cool to see it happen. That's for sure.
I recently spoke with a former Texas Education Agency Commissioner, Michael Williams, who served under Governor Perry. He's also African-American, and he told me that the state needs to do a better job of teaching and reaching Black and Brown students. What's your reaction to that?
He's exactly right. He's exactly right. One of the reasons that when you have a state summative exam like STAR, right, we can disaggregate that data, which means you can separate it by gender, by race, socioeconomic status. And that helps us understand the gaps about who's on track and who's not, who's being well served and who's not in their school settings and their environments. And that's really important. That helps us identify gaps, exactly as Commissioner Williams just was describing, that we're not accessing, we're not serving all of our Black and Latino students in the state very well. And that's a real opportunity for growth, I think, in Texas. And if you look at our state demographics, if we don't do that, there's no way our state will sort of continue this economic powerhouse if we're not including everybody who lives in our state in that access to opportunity, which is something we think is really important.
And my last question to you is, do parents have to do a better job themselves of getting involved in their kids' education?
Well, I don't like to finger wag as parents, since I'm the parent of a public school student, but I do think the important thing to take away is that this is complex work to raise children and get them ready for the next step. We can't just rely on school districts. You can't just rely on parents. It really takes sort of what we call an ecosystem of adults who are invested in the success of our young people. So yes, parents should know how your child is doing on the STAR exam. You should ask your child's teachers what's happening, what they see, to make sure you understand and can access resources. But I think all of us benefit from building up, making sure all of our kids here are prepared for their next steps and can live lives with real opportunity and ability to thrive.
Ann Wicks from the George W. Bush Institute, thank you so much for joining us and talking about this important issue. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack.
That's all for Eye on Politics this week. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jack Fink. Hope to see you again next week. You're watching CBS News Texas.